It started with a knock that should have been a warning. Not a regular knock. No, it was that overly assertive triple rap used by people who believe the world owes them something. I opened the door and found 3 people standing on my porch like they owned the place. The woman in front had the kind of professionally agitated face you only get from years of HOA meetings, Botox, and unearned authority. Clipboard in hand, she didn't even bother with pleasantries. "You're encroaching," she said. No hello, no name, just a declaration of war. Behind her were 2 others, a man who looked like a retired hall monitor and another woman with that unmistakable HOA perm, a helmet of curls so tight they looked like a defense mechanism. I should have slammed the door. Instead, I leaned against the frame and said, "I'm sorry, do you think this is a courtroom or something?" That set her off like a firework on dry grass. According to Karen, yes, her name really was Karen. They were from the Oakfest Neighborhood Beautification and Compliance Committee. A title so bloated it practically required its own zip code. They claimed that a portion of my property, specifically the wooded back corner where my grandfather's shed still stood, was actually part of Oakcrest Common Space. Which was impressive, considering I'd owned the land for 6 years, inherited it from my grandfather who'd owned it since the 50s, and it wasn't even within the Oakcrest HOA boundary. They handed me a formal violation notice anyway, complete with a grainy black and white map that looked like it had been photocopied from a 1993 real estate flyer and annotated by a raccoon with a Sharpie. I explained, calmly, that they were mistaken, that my deed was clear, that their HOA didn't extend beyond the creek, which ran 30 feet east of their so-called common area. But Karen wasn't interested in facts. "We voted," she said, "and it passed unanimously. You've got 14 days to remove the structure or we'll have it taken down ourselves." The other woman nodded like this was a perfectly normal thing to say, while the man squinted at me as if I might confess just from awkward eye contact. I smiled. Not the friendly kind, the kind you use when you're cataloging every stupid word for future legal entertainment. That weekend, I didn't remove the shed. I installed a trail camera and motion detectors. I also dug up my grandfather's old survey markers, which were still embedded in the ground like steel middle fingers aimed directly at Oakcrest. On Monday, they returned with a laminated sign that read, "Private HOA property, no trespassing." They zip-tied it to one of my pine trees and walked away like they'd just reenacted the Normandy invasion. I left it there. Cameras don't work if there's no bait. Sure enough, 5 days later at 3:42 a.m., headlights flickered in the wood. My camera caught 2 men, contractors hired by the HOA, unbolting the shed door and hauling out my tools. They made it about 10 feet before they noticed the bright red spotlight I triggered remotely from my phone. They scattered like raccoons in a garbage fire, but not before I got 3 solid license plate frames and a high-res shot of one guy falling into a mud hole. The next morning, I handed the footage to a sheriff's deputy I'd gone to high school with. He laughed so hard he nearly forgot to write the citation. The HOA responded by doubling down. Karen sent me a certified letter claiming I was aggressively provoking civil unrest by refusing to remove illegal structures and weaponizing law enforcement. She attached a fine schedule totaling $3,800 and growing by $100 per day. "Your behavior is hostile to the community," she wrote, "and not in keeping with Oakcrest values." I read that line 3 times and then laughed so hard I almost aspirated my coffee. But here's the part they didn't know. Oakcrest had a problem bigger than me: debt. Their clubhouse needed major structural repairs, the fountain hadn't worked in over a year, and their landscaping company had stopped showing up after a bounce check. Public records showed liens, lawsuits, and 3 pending judgments. And the biggest kicker? Oakcrest wasn't a closed HOA. It was technically managed as a property owners association under a weird quirk in county law, which meant its common assets could be sold, piecemeal, if the board voted to dissolve itself, or if someone else bought the debt and called the shots. So I made some calls. Quiet ones. I spoke to a real estate lawyer who specialized in distressed properties. I made a cash offer to the lien holder with the largest judgment, then bought up 2 smaller claims. The debt gave me leverage, and with leverage came voting power. By the end of the month, I controlled enough of Oakcrest's financial leash to call a special board meeting. Karen didn't show up. Maybe she thought it was a prank. But 5 other board members did. 3 were visibly nervous. 1 kept checking his phone like he might be rescued. I laid out the numbers on a projector in their own clubhouse, one they technically no longer owned. I showed them the lawsuit costs, the insurance issues, the growing liabilities. Then I made them an offer. Dissolve the HOA entirely and sell me the common spaces outright for a clean payoff and non-disclosure agreement. Or keep fighting, drown in debt, and watch me foreclose on their park benches 1 lien at a time. The vote passed. 4-1. The next morning, Karen banged on my door with a printed copy of the HOA bylaws, shaking it in my face like it was the Constitution. "This is illegal," she yelled. "You can't buy a community." I told her to read Article 9, Section C. The one about debt settlement and board authority. "You should really keep up with your own fine print," I said. She turned the color of boiled ham. I wasn't finished. Because by now, Karen had gotten personal. She'd filed nuisance complaints about my dogs barking, my fence being the wrong shade of beige, and even claimed my porch lights were blinding the neighborhood's aesthetic. Her final act was a petition to have the property rezoned so they could declare it a protected green space, effectively nullifying any private ownership right. The city denied it, but the paperwork wasted 3 months of my time and cost me a 5-figure legal fee. So when I bought the entire neighborhood, yes, all of Oakcrest's common areas, including their clubhouse, pool, tennis courts, and nature trails, I didn't just dissolve their HOA. I rebranded it Oakcrest Community Reserve. Private property. Restricted access. Residents could use it, but only with a permit issued by me. Permits were free, for those who hadn't signed the rezoning petition. Karen's name was at the top of the list. Her permit request was, of course, denied. She called the news. They didn't care. She called the mayor. He laughed. She even tried to hold an emergency HOA meeting in the parking lot, until I reminded her the parking lot was now my property. The signs went up 2 days later. Tall, shiny, and clear. Private reserve. Access by permission only. And just under that, in smaller print, trespassers will be prosecuted. The shed is still standing. So is the new cabin I built behind it. The whole thing is quiet now, except when I walk the trails and occasionally see Karen glaring at me from across the creek, clutching a clipboard like a life raft she forgot how to use. I wave every time. She never waves back. I didn't think I'd hear from Karen again so soon after the fallout, but her brand of entitlement doesn't go quietly. Just when things seem to calm down, no more cease and desist letters, no HOA memos taped to my mailbox. I got a visit from a real estate agent. Not a random one either. This woman showed up in heels sharp enough to aerate my front lawn, dressed like she had a showing in Beverly Hills, and with an expression so forcefully cheerful it made my teeth hurt. "Hi," she chirped. "I'm Laura with Windermere Premier. I just wanted to touch base about listing opportunities for your land. It's a prime corner lot now that Oakcrest is undergoing revitalization." Revitalization. That was a fun way of saying implosion. I asked her who sent her. She hesitated, then smiled again, tighter. "Well, the neighborhood has expressed interest in working with landowners for a new development partnership. There's a great opportunity here to expand cohesive community values." Her rehearsed pitch came with a brochure that featured a mock-up of new homes on what was very clearly my land. I recognized the layout. They'd photoshopped over my woods and pasted in pastel-colored bungalows with picket fences, splash pads, and a logo that read Oakcrest Heights, where community comes home. I asked her if Karen was behind this. Laura smiled even tighter and said she wasn't at liberty to disclose internal community planning discussions. So I thanked her for her time, watched her teeter back to her Lexus, and then walked to the back of my property with the brochure. I stared at it while standing in the exact spot they wanted to bulldoze and imagined what Karen thought was going to happen. I'd sell under pressure? Fold to a guilt trip? Let them pretend the HOA still had a heartbeat? They must have forgotten the part where I now owned everything they needed to make that fantasy real. The next week, a drone started hovering near my cabin. Not a cheap toy either. This was the high-end kind with a 4K camera and enough range to map crop field. I traced its flight path using my trail cams. The thing wasn't just flying overhead, it was deliberately scanning my land. I knew exactly where it was launching from too, Karen's backyard. Her red patio umbrella showed up in the footage every time. I didn't shoot it down. Instead, I sent a copy of the footage to the FAA along with a complaint citing unauthorized surveillance on private property. That earned Karen a knock on her door from a federal inspector. The drone disappeared after that. Karen didn't. Instead, she came back with a new tactic. A community-wide campaign. She started knocking on doors around Oakfest with a printed petition and flyers that read, "Save our space. Reinstate our HOA." She claimed that I had exploited a legal loophole, that I was hoarding shared land, and that I was a threat to their home values. She even held a town hall meeting in a church gymnasium and brought in a local news reporter. That segment aired during the evening news, complete with dramatic piano music and close-up footage of Karen pointing at the trailhead gate I'd installed, lamenting how she could no longer enjoy the space her children played in. She doesn't have children. She has a lapdog named Bentley who wears a sweater with his name embroidered on it. But the theatrics work. Kind of. Several of the older residents, ones who'd moved in during Oakfest's early days, got riled up enough to follow Karen's lead. I started getting anonymous complaints filed to zoning enforcement. They tried to say I was building illegally, that I had no permits, that I was operating a private business on residential land. The city looked into it once, then closed the case with an apology when they realized my cabin was legally registered and the land was zoned agricultural residential. I could have hosted pig races if I wanted. But I didn't retaliate yet. Instead, I escalated strategically. I hosted a community barbecue. Invitations went out to every Oakfest resident, delivered by hand, excluding only the handful who had signed Karen's petition. I brought in a food truck, set up picnic tables on the trailhead lawn, and had a local bluegrass band play under the pine trees. People came. Lots of them. Especially the newer residents who had no real loyalty to the HOA and were thrilled to finally meet the guy who owned the mystery land behind their fences. Turns out most of them hated the old HOA. One guy told me Karen once fined him for drying his towels on a railing. Another said she reported his car as abandoned because he parked in the same spot for 3 days. That night changed the tide. When Karen showed up, uninvited, holding a clipboard and wearing a smug grin, she tried to pass out flyers about an emergency meeting. Nobody took one. People smiled politely and kept eating pulled pork. When she tried to confront me in front of the grill, I asked loudly, "Karen, are you trespassing?" That shut her down fast. She stormed off, but the damage was done. The neighbors weren't just indifferent now, they were actively irritated with her. She made one final push after that. Filed a civil suit against me for malicious interference with neighborhood rights. It was full of legal buzzwords strung together like a high school essay written with a thesaurus and panic. Her lawyer, who also happened to be her cousin, argued that I had undermined the fabric of the community and weaponized land ownership in a targeted harassment campaign. The judge took one look at the documentation, deeds, zoning, board meeting minutes, and the fact that Karen had no actual authority anymore, and dismissed the case in 10 minutes. My lawyer didn't even get to use all the PowerPoint slides we made. Still, that lawsuit gave me an idea. A very specific, very legal idea. If Karen wanted to claim I was targeting her, then I might as well deliver something worth the accusation. So I submitted a development proposal to the city planning board. A proposal to convert Oak Crest's former clubhouse into a private artist retreat and creative co-op membership required an application, references, and an annual fee. Priority was given to applicants who had either been fined by the old HOA or who'd signed a formal statement opposing Karen's petition. The board approved it within 6 weeks. Karen saw the sign go up 2 days later. The Nest, a sanctuary for free expression. The logo had a little pine tree next to a cracked clipboard. She lost it. I heard she screamed at the sign installers until they threatened to call the police. She wrote letters to the city, the county, even the state zoning commission. She claimed it was a cult, that I was brainwashing locals, and that my artist retreat was a front for illegal activity. No one listened. In fact, her public outbursts became so common the local paper started calling her Clipboard Karen in their anonymous letters column. She hated it, which made it the nameplate on the honorary bench I installed just outside the artist retreat's main entrance, facing the woods, facing the land she tried so hard to steal. I didn't invite her to the ribbon-cutting ceremony, but she showed up anyway, standing across the street with binoculars and a homemade sign that read, "Don't trust the land thief." Nobody paid her any attention. The guests drank sparkling cider and listened to acoustic guitar under the trees. A journalist from a local culture blog asked me what the project meant to me. I looked over at Karen and said, "It took her 3 weeks to retaliate. That's longer than I expected, but I assumed she was regrouping, consulting with whatever shadow HOA cabinet she still pretended existed, calling every city office she could think of, maybe even writing a manifesto on neighborhood integrity. I underestimated her pettiness, because what she actually did was worse. She weaponized the school district. I got a certified letter on a Thursday, not from Karen directly this time, but from the County Board of Education. According to them, a concerned citizen had submitted multiple complaints alleging that my property, specifically the artist retreat, was operating as an unlicensed educational institution. The complaint claimed I was hosting workshops, charging fees, and providing housing to transient residents, in violation of zoning restrictions and potentially endangering local students by failing to meet safety code. The wording was paranoid enough to make a conspiracy theorist proud. The county sent an inspector, of course. A polite guy named Marcus who showed up in khakis and a clipboard, clearly embarrassed to be there. I offered him a lemonade and gave him a full tour. He confirmed there were no children on site, no formal classes, no tuition, no dormitories. Just a few studio spaces, an outdoor reading deck, and a woman named Carol who makes sculptures out of reclaimed fence wire. Marcus left laughing and promised to file the report as unsubstantiated. I asked him if the complaint was from someone named Karen. He didn't say yes, but he did roll his eyes in a way that said everything. Still, she'd found a new angle, and it gave me a hint of how far she was willing to go. I knew I had to escalate beyond passive resistance. It was time to hit her where it hurt, her sense of control. I filed a petition with the county to rename the nature trail that ran behind her house. It was formerly just Oak Crest Trail, part of the old HOA-managed park system. Now, as the legal landowner, I submitted a request to rename it Karen's Curve. I included a commemorative plaque design, named in honor of persistent civic engagement and the dangers of overreach. It was dry, bureaucratic, and just passive-aggressive enough to get approved. The sign went up on a Friday. I made sure it faced directly toward her kitchen window. That weekend, I heard the sound of metal grinding around 6 a.m., Karen trying to unscrew the bolt. She failed. I had them tamper-proofed and backed with steel plates. When she called to complain, the county clerk told her the name had been voted on and recorded. Public record. Permanent. After that, things went quiet for almost a month. I knew she was plotting. Karen doesn't retreat, she marinates. Sure enough, she came back swinging, with a city council proposal. She somehow convinced a councilman to sponsor a motion to designate the Oak Crest area as a historical preservation zone. If passed, it would place heavy restrictions on any new development, renovations, or landscaping. It wouldn't revert ownership, but it would freeze progress. It was exactly the kind of red tape she loved. Slow, vague, and suffocating. What she didn't realize is that I had already become a donor to the Parks Commission, the Public Arts Council, and 3 different local nonprofits. I wasn't just building a retreat, I was building goodwill. So when the motion came up for review, I showed up to the hearing in a suit, not flannel. I presented documentation showing how much revenue the nest had generated for local businesses, how many artists had relocated to the area, and how I'd personally sponsored 2 community cleanup events. I also submitted a petition with over 200 signatures. Oak Crest residents who'd attended the barbecue and signed on to support my development project. Karen showed up with 5 people and a stack of documentation that included grainy photos of the trail and a list of suspicious activities, which amounted to things like people painting, reading, and, horrifyingly, playing a banjo. She wore a pantsuit that looked like it had been purchased for a courtroom drama audition and spoke for 10 minutes about the loss of values and encroaching artistic socialism. The council looked bored. The motion was unanimously denied. After that defeat, she pivoted from legal action to psychological warfare. She started hosting prayer meetings on her lawn, twice a week, loudspeakers and all, complete with sermons about the sanctity of order and defending the land from chaos. Her yard filled with plastic chairs, folding tables of suspicious casserole, and old folks who had no idea they were pawns in a turf war. Every time I walked down the trail, someone would yell, "God bless you," like it was a hex. I started calling it the cult of the clam chowder. I considered calling code enforcement for the noise violations. But then I had a better idea. I installed a community bulletin board at the trail entrance. Not digital, not fancy. Just a big wooden board with a glass cover, cork backing, and a neat brass lock. And I made one rule. Anyone in Oak Crest could post on it, as long as the message wasn't political or religious. Suddenly the board filled with garage sale flyers, lost pet posters, and a very intense ad for gluten-free kombucha soap. It became a hit. Except Karen hated it, because no one posted her flyers. When she tried, I simply removed them under the posted rules. She raged. She emailed me 5 times in one day. She even tried to break into the board with a screwdriver, which I only know because I got the whole thing on trail cam footage. I posted a still frame of her attempted break-in, zoomed in on her angry face, on the bulletin board the next day under the title Community Moment of the Week. At this point, the neighbors were openly laughing. Not just at Karen, but with me. They left thank you notes at the retreat, baked goods, and one guy even wrote a haiku titled, Ode to the Death of Clipboards. She still had her little inner circle of loyalists, but it had shrunk down to 4 families and Bentley the dog. Her power base was gone, her reputation shattered, and yet, somehow, she still kept pushing. So I gave her one final gift. I held an open mic storytelling night at the Nest. Theme: Neighborhood Nightmares. The stories weren't mean-spirited. Just funny, absurd, a little petty. One guy read a short play about a woman who finds a butterfly for landing on an unapproved flower. Another shared a poem about HOA lawn wars titled Blades of Shame. They weren't even about Karen, not directly. But everyone knew. Karen stood at the edge of the event the whole time. Watching. Not saying a word. Just clutching a clipboard like it was all she had left. She never even tried to walk in. I think she finally understood that she'd lost something far bigger than a shed or a trail or a fake jurisdiction. She'd lost control of the story. And I wasn't done telling it yet. I was in the middle of chopping wood behind the cabin when the drone came back. I recognized it instantly. Same body, same buzz, same slow, circling pattern. But this time, it wasn't just hovering. It was broadcasting. Loudly. I could hear a voice, echoing through some onboard speaker, amplified to just the right level of obnoxious. Attention residents. Be advised that the so-called artist retreat is operating illegally and may be subject to civil penalties. Do not be misled. I stared up at the thing in disbelief as it looped twice over my garden, blaring Karen's voice like some dystopian lawn care propaganda machine. I grabbed my phone and checked the trailcam feed. Sure enough, the drone had launched from Karen's backyard again. Her patio umbrella was still there, but this time she'd added a table with laminated flyers and a battery-powered megaphone. She was standing next to it, arms crossed like a general watching over her siege engine. This was no longer just a nuisance. It was harassment. So I called the FAA again, but I already knew the dance. I'd report, they'd investigate, she'd deny ownership, and the drone would mysteriously vanish for a week before reappearing under a new registration number. Instead, I opted for something faster. I called Jake. Jake is the kind of guy you don't ask how he makes his money. Retired Navy, part-time salvage operator, and full-time tech tinkerer. He once built a device that could remotely disable Bluetooth speakers from 2 houses away. When I explained the situation, Jake asked one question. Do you want it gone or humiliated? I chose humiliation. He laughed and said he'd stop by that night. By sunrise, Karen's drone had a new paint job. Neon pink with a sticky note glued to the lens. Eyes are for owls, not Karens. Jake didn't destroy it. He just caught it mid-flight with a signal jammer, forced it to land, and returned it with a few decorative touches. We left it on her porch, right under her laminated flyers. She didn't say a word, but the drone never flew again. Still, I knew Karen wasn't finished. Her ego was like a weed, cut it back and it just grew sideways. And that's when I found the lawsuit. Well, technically, I found it taped to my door in a manila envelope. Inside was a copy of a formal complaint filed under Karen's name, along with 5 co-signers. They were suing me for community defamation, emotional distress, and loss of legacy value. Their argument? That my campaign of retaliation, mockery, and weaponized land ownership had psychologically damaged them, devalued their homes, and eroded their lifelong contributions to the moral fabric of Oakfest. The best part? They attached screenshots of my community bulletin board. Specifically, the Community Moment of the Week image of Karen's failed lockpick attempt, which they called public shaming. They also cited Karen's curve as an act of geographical slander. I didn't even know that was a thing. But here's where it got tricky. They weren't suing in small claims this time. They'd filed in civil court with a real attorney. Not Karen's cousin, but someone with an actual license and a website. This wasn't a money grab. It was a last-ditch attempt to claw back control through legal chaos. And if I didn't play it right, they might succeed. So I called Sarah. Sarah's a real estate litigation lawyer with the charm of a cobra and the memory of a tax auditor. She also owed me a favor from back when I helped her out of a nasty HOA dispute involving a fence, a koi pond, and a man named Dwayne who believed he was allergic to water sounds. I gave her the packet and she read through it silently. Then she said, "Oh, they're idiot. Let's burn this down legally." We filed a counterclaim, one that included harassment, unauthorized surveillance, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We attached every letter, video, drone clip, flyer, and memo they'd ever sent me. Sarah also dug up old HOA meeting notes where Karen had publicly mocked certain residents, threatened to fine a blind woman for not trimming her hedge, and proposed mandatory uniform flowerbed color schemes. We compiled all of it. We even subpoenaed the former board treasurer, who had since moved to Florida and was more than happy to talk. The court date was set for 6 weeks out, and those 6 weeks, Karen turned them into the most exhausting circus imaginable. She hosted Unity Nights in her driveway with speakers blasting inspirational music, a popcorn machine, and slideshow presentations of Oakfest before the artist invasion. She handed out T-shirts with the slogan, "Take Back the Trail." She even tried to paint a mural on the back of her fence, a gaudy, crooked rendition of what Oakcrest used to be, complete with unicorn-colored skies and unnaturally symmetrical hedges. But while she was busy rallying nostalgia, I was building leverage. Sarah had discovered a crucial piece of the puzzle: the HOA's financial records. Specifically, Karen's mishandling of discretionary funds from her final year as board president. Turns out she'd hired her nephew's landscaping company, one that didn't exist on paper, to perform beautification projects that never happened. The checks were real. The work wasn't. Fraud. Plain and simple. So we added it to the case. The trial wasn't long. Karen's lawyer came in swinging, opening with a 10-minute monologue about suburban sanctity and how I had unleashed a psychological assault on a community of elders. He tried to frame me as a manipulator, a malicious loner who moved in just to dismantle their way of life. But then Sarah took over. Calm, precise, and ruthless, she walked the court through timelines, footage, contracts, and Karen's own emails. She even read aloud one of Karen's Facebook posts where she referred to me as a land-thieving parasite with a beard. I don't even have a beard. The judge wasn't amused. After 2 days of testimony, he ruled in our favor. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. Our counterclaim? Accepted. Karen was ordered to pay $18,000 in damages for harassment, defamation, and the unauthorized use of a drone. Her co-signers were fined individually for their participation in the smear campaign. And then, just for fun, the judge referred the HOA's old financial records to the state attorney's office for review. The courtroom was silent. Karen didn't speak. She just stared straight ahead, lips tight, hands gripping the table like she might flip it. Her lawyer patted her shoulder and whispered something that looked a lot like, "We'll discuss payment plans." After the ruling, I stood outside the courthouse, half expecting her to confront me. She didn't. But one of her co-plaintiffs, a woman named Diane who once reported my cabin chimney as a fire risk to the spiritual ecosystem, walked by and said, "You've destroyed something beautiful." I looked her dead in the eye and replied, "No, I just held up a mirror." I went home that night to a bottle of good scotch and silence. The kind of silence that feels like a full-body exhale after months of holding your breath. I thought maybe, finally, this was the end. That maybe Karen would retreat into her vinyl-sided lair and stew in peace. But I was wrong. Because as I looked out across the trail from my porch, I noticed something new. A sign. Freshly staked into the ground, with glittery puff paint letters and hand-drawn flowers, it read, "Oak Crest will rise again." And right below that, in smaller, shaky handwriting, Phase 2 begins. Phase 2, apparently, began with a bake sale. Or at least that's what the pastel flyers claimed. Support the Oak Crest Reclamation Fund, they said in loopy handwriting, posted on every telephone pole and park bench in a 5-mile radius. Karen had enlisted her loyalists, what remained of them, and set up folding tables on the sidewalk just outside the trail entrance, technically still on public right-of-way. They sold cookies shaped like houses and offered fundraising hot chocolate, even though it was 80 degrees. Someone even brought a donation jar shaped like a birdhouse that read, "Rebuild the heart of the neighborhood." The audacity was sugary sweet and absurd. I stopped by out of sheer morbid curiosity. Karen spotted me instantly and stood tall like a prom queen guarding her tiara. "Good morning," she said coldly. "We're collecting for legal restoration." I raised an eyebrow. Restoration? Of what? Your reputation or your court fees? She smiled like a shark at a wedding. Of a way of life. We're exploring a new model of cooperative ownership. We've already met with a property trust advisor. I nearly choked on a snickerdoodle. The plan, as it turned out, was even more delusional than her last few stunts. Karen's Phase 2 was a scheme to buy back portions of the old Oak Crest Commons, my land, through a community trust. Her idea was to pool funds from sympathetic neighbors, present themselves as a preservation group, and offer to purchase the trails and clubhouse under a conservation easement. Then, once acquired, they'd reinstate HOA-like controls under the guise of community stewardship. In theory, they'd undo everything with enough bake sales, GoFundMe links, and PowerPoints. Except there was a problem. Actually, several. First, I wasn't selling anything. Second, even if I were, the land's assessed value had quadrupled since I restored it, making her fantasy price point laughable. And third, she still had a public harassment judgment against her. The only way she was going to reclaim anything was if I had a stroke and rewrote my will in glitter pen. So I decided to throw a little fundraiser of my own. It was billed as Oakfest, a one-day arts and music event hosted on the trails and around the artist retreat. I got a permit, insurance, food trucks, local sponsors, and performers. I made sure the entire thing was city-approved and above board. Flyers went out. Press releases hit local blogs. I even hired a photographer to document the event in real time and livestream highlights on a projector screen across from Karen's house. By noon, we had over 300 people. Families, artists, dog walkers, retired teachers, and teenagers with paint-splattered jeans. We had banjo players, poets, face painters, a wood-carving demo, and a booth that let kids build miniature birdhouses with recycled fence wood. Someone handed me a Karen's Curve Survivor pin. Someone else gifted me a coffee mug that read HOA this, in red lettering. The energy was electric, kind, creative, alive. At exactly 2:15 p.m., Karen arrived. She wasn't alone. Her faithful four, Diane, Chuck, Phyllis, and Greg, marched behind her like poorly organized backup dancers. Karen wore a white visor, a clipboard slung under her arm, and a sash across her chest that read Neighborhood First. They didn't walk in. They processed, like royalty showing up uninvited to a peasant fair. Karen stepped up to the main trail intersection, where people were sketching portraits and playing cornhole, and loudly declared, "This event is not sanctioned by the Oakcrest Community Trust." Several people turned. One clapped. Someone else offered her a popsicle. I walked up calmly, microphone still in hand, and addressed her directly. "Actually, Karen, everything here is permitted and legal. You're welcome to enjoy the music, or find a quieter trail." She stiffened. "You're corrupting this space, turning it into a circus." I smiled. "And yet, you keep showing up for the show." Karen snapped. She launched into a speech about gentrified art colonizers, communal brainwashing, and the death of property ethics. She even tried to rally the crowd, waving her clipboard like it was a sword. "Who here remembers what this community used to be?" she cried. One guy near the front raised his hand and shouted, "Oppressive and beige." Laughter erupted. Karen turned crimson. Her eyes locked on me, and in a final, desperate burst, she reached for the projector's power cord and yanked it out. The live stream cut. People gasped, then booed. Someone shouted, "Hey! That's destruction of property." A teenager filmed the whole thing and uploaded it within minutes. The video hit 80,000 views by nightfall. Police didn't arrest her, but she was escorted out by an officer with a clipboard of his own, an incident report form. She left to scattered applause. That was the last public appearance Karen made in Oakcrest. A week later, I received a letter. Not handwritten, not typed, printed and anonymous. But it was from her. You could tell by the phrasing. Tragic distortion of legacy, malicious cultural infestation, and my personal favorite, an anti-suburban coup masquerading as modern art. She said she was putting her house up for sale. That Oakcrest had been invaded by irreverence. That she hoped I'd choke on my artisan ideology. I laughed for 5 solid minutes. She did move. Not right away. The house sat on the market for a while. When she finally sold it, the buyer was a recently retired art therapist from New York who set up a ceramic studio in the backyard. I sent her a welcome basket with a candle labeled Serenity by Karen. The sign on her front gate? Taken down. The mailbox? Repainted. The clipboard? Who knows? And the neighborhood? It thrived. Without the HOA. Without the fines. Without the surveillance. The artist retreat grew into a nonprofit. We added a community garden, hosted monthly storytelling nights, and ran free weekend workshops for local kids. People planted what they wanted, painted what they loved, and waved without checking whose grass was half an inch too tall. One afternoon, I sat on a bench near the trail, coffee in hand, and watched a golden retriever bolt past a group of kids chasing butterflies. A new neighbor sat beside me, looking around like she couldn't believe this place used to be under dictatorship. "This is the freest neighborhood I've ever seen," she said. I smiled. "It used to be ruled by a clipboard." She laughed, but I wasn't kidding. Because that's what this whole war had really been about. Control. The illusion of order. The fear of mess, creativity, contradiction. Karen wanted uniformity. I wanted community. She clung to rules. I nurtured expression. She built fences. I opened trails. She lost. And I didn't just win. I turned the ruins of her little kingdom into something better. Phase 2 was hers. But Phase 3? That belonged to all of us.